it rolls over the sea like spilled milk at the end of every autumn, draping the fingers of the archipelago in a grey shroud thick enough to drown sound. On those nights, the folk of Rainhaven believe the water forgets its own shape, and the channels between their jagged islands blur until a boat can sail in circles for hours, convinced it is still moving forward. The fishermen leave before dawn regardless, for the town lives and dies by the silver shoals that gather far from any shoreline. Their only trust lies in an object as old as the reef itself, a plain pitted lantern made entirely of white salt, brilliant as bone, yet warm as a hearthstone. No one agrees on how the lantern first appeared. Some say a storm tore open the seabed and a single shard of fossilized brine floated up like a seed. Others claim it was carved by a hermit who mistook the sea for the sky and tried to steal back the stars, or most simply repeat the story their grandmothers told, that the lantern was a gift from the tides, meant to travel forever so that honest people might travel with it. What all versions share is the covenant attached to its glow. The light can part fog like a knife. It can draw a path between whirlpools no compass can map, and it has never failed to bring its bearer safely home, as long as the bearer's heart remains free of covetous thought. The moment a man or woman uses the lantern for gain beyond need, each crystal in its lattice begins to weep and dissolve. First into pearls of water, then into a salty rain that vanishes before touching wood. For 3 generations, the task of carrying the lantern out to sea fell to the family of Dorian Crest, a line of small-framed, quietly spoken sailors known for returning with nets full enough to feed the hamlet, but never overflowing. Dorian had inherited the duty from his mother, Maris, who lost her left arm during a squall, yet never allowed her grip on the lantern to slacken. When she died, the town gathered on the cliff path in candle-lit silence, and the priest placed the salt lantern in Dorian's calloused hands. He was 20, his beard no thicker than moss, but he bowed his head with solemn certainty. The next morning he led a trio of skiffs into haze so thick the oars might as well have been churning milk, and he emerged before noon with enough mackerel for every heart. Rainhaven exhaled its relief, and life continued. The year the story truly began, Dorian had grown into a man of 34 winters. He had a wife, Elara, whose laugh carried down alleys like gulls on draught, and a daughter, Willow, who at 9 could already splice rope better than half the docks. Trade winds, however, had faltered all season, and Rainhaven's smokehouses stood idle. People tightened belts, a wedding was postponed, candles were burned down to stubs. Each morning Dorian took out his crew and returned with just enough base to keep the town from hunger, but the lean days gnawed at him in private. He could not ignore the way Willow's cheeks hollowed. No matter how cheerfully she chased crabs along the seawall, the tension snapped when a foreign brig anchored beyond the reef, its hull black as cormorant feathers and its sails stitched from crimson cloth. The captain, a tall woman named Sarah Locke, rowed ashore under a banner depicting a crown balanced on a scale. She introduced herself as an agent of the Guild of Maritime Provisioners, a consortium supplying luxury markets in larger ports. The guild, she explained, was willing to buy Rainhaven's entire seasonal catch at triple the usual rate, provided the fishermen could deliver at least 2 tons of dried and salted fish each fortnight. The elders gathered in the alehouse, faces furrowed like folded nets. 2 tons was more than Rainhaven had ever drawn from the channel in a month, let alone 2 weeks. "We cannot give what the sea will not," the priest said, lifting his palms in apology. Captain Locke merely smiled. "Your sea holds more than you think," she replied. "Or perhaps you have yet to look far enough." That night Dorian sat on the porch of his cottage, the salt lantern resting on the rail like a pale moon. His wife rubbed his shoulders, though her hands trembled. "If we could fish farther past the outcrop," Elara murmured, "where the cod run thicker, we might meet the guild's quota." Dorian shook his head. "Those waters are cursed by undertow. No chart holds their mercurial paths." Ilara's gaze drifted to the lantern. The light, would show the way. At that suggestion, something inside Dorian recoiled, as if a gull had shrieked overhead. He rose, lifted the lantern, and carried it indoors without another word. But at once in the dark of the house he found himself staring into its steady glow, imagining Willow with a full bowl of porridge instead of the watery gruel she now sipped. He pictured the guild's coin enough to repair the pier, mend sails, buy medicine for the elderly. Surely these were needs, not greed. At dawn the next day, Dorian addressed the harbour assembly. He proposed a single extended venture beyond the known shoals, using the lantern to keep the fleet aligned. "We take only what we can carry," he promised, "no more." The elders frowned. The priest reminded him of the covenant, but the townsfolk, gaunt and weary, murmured hope into one another's sleeves. In the end, the majority consented, swayed less by greed than by fear of another barren winter. Captain Locke, who had been waiting under her red-sailed brig, listened to the decision with a smile so slight it barely wrinkled her cheek. They set out on the turn of the tide. 8 vessels followed Dorian's sloop, each bearing wide nets and extra barrels for brine. The lantern hung from the sloop's mast, its rays painting a corridor through the rust-colored fog that rose as they breached the outer reef. The fishermen whispered prayers as new silhouettes of rock jutted from mist, harsh as broken teeth. Past the last familiar buoy, they discovered a plateau of water so still it reflected the sky despite the gloom, an eerie mirror broken only by the hump and flash of countless cod. Nets went over the sides in a frenzy. Within an hour, the lead boat's hold was near bursting. Elated cries echoed across the fleet. Dorian should have been relieved, yet he felt a pinch in his chest. They already had more fish than the town had consumed in 2 months. But casks remained unfilled. He signaled the fleet. "One more pass." The lantern pulsed bright, as if hesitant. Still the line of boats drifted onward. A second cast deepened the bounty, but now more barrels waited. "A third pass and we're done," Dorian called, voice taut. He watched Captain Locke's brig in the distance. Through a spyglass he saw her tapping a brass pocket watch, then raising her brow. "One more," Dorian muttered, almost to the lantern. "The villagers need us." During that final haul, the cod thrashed so violently that 2 nets tore and oars splintered against writhing heaps of silver-blue bodies. When the frenzy cleared, every boat rode low in the water. Stacks of barrels lashed across decks. The men and women cheered, but as the echoes faded, Dorian noticed droplets sliding down the lantern's crystalline pane. They were not condensation. Each bead glittered salt-white, then dripped, leaving behind a pockmark no bigger than the pit of a cherry. He knew at once what it meant. A chill replaced his pride. Yet the damage seemed superficial. Only a dozen such spots, and the glow held steady. "We leave now," he ordered. The fleet turned. On the journey home, the sea grew restless. Swells rose without wind, slapping hulls sideways. Mist thickened until every boat saw only the lantern's ray miles ahead. Balancing barrels threatened to roll. More than once a sailor shouted that a shape moved beneath the water, darker than any shadow. But when others looked, nothing surfaced. Dorian stood at the prow, knuckles white on the rail, gaze locked to the lantern. If he could return before sunset, he thought, perhaps he could carve away the damaged edges, offer penance, and save the remaining light. They crossed the reef just before dusk. Villagers lined the wharf, voices raised in awe at the sight of swollen halls. Captain Locke's crew was already ashore, having circled back via a faster channel. Crates of coin gleamed beneath tarps. Children danced, elders wiped tears. Only the priest stared at the lantern and saw the tiny wounds glazing its shell. He stepped forward as Dorian tied off. "How much did you take?" the priest asked. "Dorian," Horse whispered. "Enough." The priest's gaze flicked to Captain Locke supervising tally sheets. "Enough for whom?" he replied. That night, celebrations lit the town. But Dorian could not stay among the revelers. He slipped to his cottage and placed the lantern on the table. A frost of doubt coated his mind. He recalled the promise. Need, not greed. Had they crossed the line? The droplets had stopped. Yet the pockmarks remained. He fetched a damp cloth to clean the surface. The moment the rag touched salt, a hiss rose. A corner of the lantern dissolved, leaving a jagged gap the size of a thumb. Horror clawed up his throat. The lantern's beam flickered. Before he could process, 3 sharp knocks struck the door. Captain Locke entered without waiting for permission. Boots muddy, eyes glittering with the lantern's unsteady glow. "I'll need another shipment next fortnight," she said. "Double, if you can manage." Dorian stared, stunned. "The quota is met?" Locke smiled thinly. "Markets expand," she replied. "Think of the coin crest. Your daughter could attend a mainland academy. Your wife could have velvet shoes for every day of the year." She stretched a hand toward the lantern as if to examine it. Dorian's body moved on instinct. He slapped her wrist away. For an instant they glared at each other under the dim light. Then Locke stepped back, eyes narrowing. "Careful, fisherman," she whispered. "Some lights go out when you least expect." She left. Dorian barred the door. His hands shook so violently he nearly dropped the lantern. He sank to the floor, back against the wall, and waited through the long hours until dawn. By morning, the town awoke to tragedy. 2 deckhands who had unloaded fish overnight were found dead on the pier, their bodies twisted, skin-lined with pale crust as though they had drowned in brine, then sun-dried. The priest convened an emergency council in the chapel. Rumors spread that those men had pocketed coins from the guild's payment, hiding them under their beds. The coins were gone, their sheets soaked in salty puddles. Villagers stared at Dorian, at the lantern now veiled on the table beside him. He spoke quietly. "The lantern warns us. We must return what we do not need." Murmurs of fear met his words, but greed is a subtle parasite once invited to feast. Some protested that the deaths were coincidences. Others reasoned that the dead men had acted alone in theft. The bulk of the town deserved its reward. While voices clashed, Captain Locke addressed the group. "The guild regrets the loss," she said, "but accidents happen." She produced a fresh contract, offering even higher rates for an ongoing supply chain. "Prosperity often demands risk," she concluded, "yet risk breeds progress." Many eyes brightened. Locke declared she would sail at dusk. She expected their answer by then. Dorian left the chapel and walked to the cliff path where Willow was gathering windflowers. He tried to smile, but when she handed him a blossom, his eyes filled with tears. "Papa, why are you sad? We have food now." He knelt. "Do you remember the first lesson I taught you about the sea?" She tilted her head. "Take only what you can carry, and be ready to give it back." He nodded. "Sometimes giving back is harder than carrying." She hugged him. In her scent of salt and grass he found resolve. That afternoon he approached the town square, lantern wrapped in sailcloth. He climbed the wellstone and called for silence. "The sea bless us," he said, "but we pressed beyond blessing into bounty, and beyond bounty into avarice. The lantern has begun to die. If we keep it, Rainhaven will join it in death." He unwrapped the object. Gasps rose. The lantern's once seamless shell now wore cracks like spider webs. Drops formed where sunlight touched it, hissing away as steam. "We must return the excess to the sea," Dorian declared. "Tonight we sail and cast back every barrel we cannot eat this week, all of us." Visible battle lines split faces. Some nodded, others clenched jaws. A merchant named Corbin, who had recently lined his coat with gilt buttons, shouted, "That lantern is just salt and superstition." He brandished a pouch of guild coin. "Gold is real." Dorian met his gaze. Without a word, he extended the lantern toward Corbin. "Take it, then." Corbin hesitated, then snatched the handle. Instantly steam surged. Every inch his skin touched turned white, cracking. He screamed, dropping the lantern, but not before a sheet of salt spread across his palm like frostbite. Villagers scattered in panic. The lantern rolled, striking the heel of the priest, who yelped but remained unharmed. He had been reaching to help. Chaos erupted, voices argued, some pleading to obey the warning, others cursing superstition. Captain Locke seized the moment. "Fear chains you," she shouted. "Follow me instead, and you will own more than scraps of fish and sand." She strode toward the docks, several men and women trailing, lured by her certainty. Dorian saw the town splintering like driftwood. He lifted the lantern, its heat seared, but did not scold him, and cried, "Those who remember the covenant, to me!" Twilight bled across clouds as two groups formed. One on the wharf beside Locke's boats, stacked with empty barrels. The other encircling Dorian near the tide pools. Their arms full of fish, they begged to surrender. Among them were Ilara, Willow, the priest, and a handful of grey-haired women who remembered famine. Dorian led them into skiffs once more. They rowed beyond the reef, the cracking lantern painting weaker tunnels through fog that now swirled like living smoke. Midway through the channel, shapes emerged. Locke's followers in separate boats, chasing, eager to seize both barrels and lantern. A shout carried, hollow in the mist. Dorian knew they meant to stop him. He turned to his small fleet. Cussed the excess. One by one, barrels splashed overboard, releasing glimmering fish back into cold embrace. As each barrel sank, the lantern's cracks sealed a hair's breadth, droplets slowing. But Locke's boats closed in. A grappling hook clanged off Dorian's gunwale. Corbin, his bandaged hand shaking, roared from behind Locke, "Give over the light!" A sudden swell rocked both fleets. From the deep rose a pulse, as if the sea's heart had beat once against the hull. Dorian's crew clung to rails. Locke's boats lurched, men stumbling. Another swell followed, higher. Through sheets of fog, Dorian glimpsed a colossal form turning beneath. Maybe whale, maybe something older. Fear stiffened spines on every deck. The salt lantern flashed, brilliant for an instant, illuminating the waterline. Where each barrel had sunk, sparkling vortices spiraled, swallowing brine in shining columns, as though the sea drank her gift eagerly. Locke steadied herself, eyes reflecting the flash. "You cannot save them all," she hissed across the water. She motioned for her crew to board Dorian's sloop. As two men leapt, Willow let out a cry. Dorian acted without thought. He unhooked the lantern from its chain and lifted it high. "The sea will choose," he yelled, and flung the lantern into the center of the swirling void where the barrels had vanished. Time nodded. The lantern spun, shards flaking off mid-air, leaving salt dust that glittered like snow. When it hit the water, silence fell. No splash, no hiss. Instead, a low hum arose, deep and resonant. Light burst upward in a column, parting fog for miles. Every wave froze mid-crest, glowing from within, revealing skeletons of ancient wrecks far below, silver shoals twisting like galaxies. Fishermen and fortune-seekers alike stared in stunned reverence. Then, as gently as breath, the sea exhaled. The column collapsed. Water resumed motion, but the glow remained, not in a lantern, but in a path, a luminous ribbon snaking through the mist toward Rainhaven. Where the ribbon touched, Locke's boats, wood moaned and seams split, releasing barrels that had been stored on deck. Fish spilled back, slipping overboard. Locke screamed orders, but oars could not fight currents now commanded by the light. Her boats drifted helplessly until they too were caught in the ribbon and nudged along, stern first, toward shore. Dorian's sloop floated, empty masts creaking. He held Willow close, tears mixing with sea spray. The priest, mouth open in awe, whispered, "The lantern has become the sea." Slowly, the small fleet aligned behind the living path and followed its silent guidance home. They landed by moonrise. The ribbon dispersed into a million fireflies of white radiance that settled on roofs, nets, and waves, then dimmed to ordinary starlight. Locke's followers stumbled onto the sand, some weeping, some cursing, but none willing to meet Dorian's eyes. As for the captain, she stood alone amid broken barrels, staring at her palms as if surprised they held nothing. Exhausted villagers gathered while the priest addressed them. "We have witnessed grace and warning," he said. "May we remember which is which." Dorian felt a hollow ache where the lantern's weight used to rest, yet inside that ache flickered peace. He knelt, cupped a bit of damp sand, and found it tasted faintly of salt and sunlight. In the months that followed, Rainhaven took only what the tide offered. Nets came back lighter, but bellies stayed full. A new custom arose. Before the first boat departed each dawn, a bowl of the choicest fish was carried to the surf and released with thanks. At night, on fog-bound horizons, fishermen sometimes saw a faint white shimmer tracing the waves, no longer a tether to greed or fear, but a reminder. Light is happiest in open hands. Captain Locke departed soon after, sails patched with dull canvas, her ambition corroded by a lesson she would never admit aloud. Some say she died chasing new legends. Others claim she sits at a mainland bar, staring into a glass of brine no spirit can dilute. Willow Crest grew into a skipper whose laughter still echoed along the seawall. And though she never held the lantern of salt, she carried its covenant. She taught it to her children in a single sentence that resonated through generations. Take only what you can give back, and the way will always shine.